The echo of an iron gate closing reverberates through the empty hallway. A gray-haired man stares at walls he knows by heart, every crack, every shadow. 18 years have passed since he first crossed these bars, 18 years counting days like drops of water in a desert. His rough hands tremble slightly as he holds a crumpled letter, a letter that changed everything he thought he knew about his destiny. Outside, beyond the concrete walls, the northern wind carries the scent of freshly rained earth, that smell that once meant life, honest work under the relentless sun of the Heartland. He remembers when he was young, when his hands worked the land with pride, when his eyes sparkled looking at that woman with crystalline laughter who stole his heart at the county fair. But all of that was buried on a night of fury, in a moment of madness that haunts him every dawn when the silence of his cell becomes unbearable. A deceptive photograph, poisoned words, and the blood of an innocent man that stained his hands forever. What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine while paying his sentence in absolute solitude, was that life had saved a revelation that would shake the very foundations of his existence. A son who grew up without knowing him, who carries his blood but not his last name, who became a lawyer precisely to understand why his father destroyed so many lives in a single instant. Tomorrow, the gates will open. Tomorrow, after 18 years of absence, he'll breathe the air of freedom again. But the real question isn't whether the world will forgive him, but whether he can forgive himself. And if that son he never knew can look him in the eyes and call him father. This is the story of a man who lost everything in a moment of rage, of a woman who waited against all hope, and of a son who sought answers in the pages of law to understand the human heart. It's the story of how destiny, cruel and generous at the same time, can close a door but open a window when we least expect it. Join us in this tale of pain and redemption, of unforgivable mistakes and unbreakable love. Share your thoughts in the comments. Pass the story along to someone you think needs to hear it. Because in the end, we all carry our own prisons, and we all need to believe that redemption is possible. The suffocating August heat mixed with smoke from cheap cigarettes at the Silent Oak Tavern. Michael Hayes, a 26-year-old man with hands weathered by farm work, clutched a photograph that burned his soul. His bloodshot eyes couldn't look away from that image. Sarah, his Sarah, embracing another man, smiling in a way she'd never smiled at him. Michael had worked his entire life in the cornfields of the northern plains, following in his father's footsteps. He was a quiet man, of few words but firm convictions. When he met Sarah Bennett at the County Harvest Festival, he knew he'd found the woman of his life. She was the daughter of Raymond Salazar, owner of the largest ranch in the valley, a woman who shouldn't have noticed a simple farmhand. But love doesn't understand social classes. For 6 months they met in secret, stealing minutes from destiny, building dreams that seemed impossible. Michael had promised her he'd save every penny, work twice as hard, that someday they'd have their own land and could be together without hiding. That promise now seemed like a cruel mockery of fate. 3 weeks ago, Sarah had stopped coming to their meetings. Without explanation, without goodbye, she simply vanished from his life as if she'd never existed. Michael asked around, searched, waited. Until that afternoon, when a man named Lawrence Gardner approached him with a malicious smile and handed him the photograph. "Thought you should know the truth, friend. Your princess already found someone from her own class," he'd said with venom in every word. On the back of the photograph was a dedication that shattered what remained of his hope. "Together forever, S.B." Michael drank. He drank to silence the pain, to extinguish the images torturing his mind, to find the courage or madness necessary to do something, anything, that would give him back control of his shattered life. When he saw Anthony Mendez, the neighboring landowner's son and the man in the photograph, leave the tavern toward the back alley, something broke inside Michael. There was no rational thought, no plan. Only rage, pain, and the knife he always carried on his belt for cutting ropes in the field. What happened in that dark alley took less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes that would change the course of 3 lives forever. Anthony Mendez fell to the ground lifeless, and Michael remained kneeling beside the body, staring at his blood-stained hands, understanding with absolute clarity that he'd just crossed a line of no return. He didn't try to run. When the authorities arrived, he was still there, paralyzed by the horror of what he'd done. The sentence came quickly. 20 years in prison for manslaughter. Sarah Bennett had been locked in her room by her father for a month. Raymond, upon discovering the romance between his daughter and the farmhand, had taken drastic measures. He watched her constantly, intercepted any messages, and had arranged a marriage commitment with Anthony Mendez, a young man from a good family who would consolidate the power of both ranches. When Sarah learned of the crime, her world collapsed. She ran to the county jail, begging to see Michael, but her father arrived first and dragged her back home. What Raymond didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Sarah carried a secret that would change everything. She was pregnant. 2 months after Michael's imprisonment, Sarah discovered her condition. She confronted her father with a courage she'd never shown before. She told him she'd have that child, raise it alone, and that he could disinherit her if he wanted, but she wouldn't give up the only thing she had left of the man she loved. Raymond roared, threatened, but finally yielded to his daughter's determination. With one condition: Michael must never know about the child. Sarah, destroyed but without options, agreed. She thought it was better for her child to grow up without knowing a father in prison, without carrying that stigma. She moved to Kansas City, where nobody knew her story. She had her son in solitude, crying during labor because Michael wasn't there to hold her hand. She named him Daniel, and every time she looked into his eyes, she saw Michael reflected in them. The years passed slowly. Sarah never married, never allowed another man to get close to her. She worked sewing to support her son, living with the silent dignity of someone carrying an invisible cross. She told Daniel stories about his father, without revealing where he was, painting him as a hero so the boy would grow up proud of his roots. Daniel Hayes grew up with questions his mother never fully answered. Where is my father? Why doesn't he come see us? Did I do something wrong to make him abandon me? Sarah deflected the conversations, promised future explanations, but the pain in her eyes said more than any words. The boy became a brilliant young man, obsessed with justice. While his classmates dreamed of being doctors or engineers, Daniel only thought about law, about understanding how the system that kept so many secrets worked. He excelled in school, earned a scholarship to university, and specialized in criminal law with a determination that impressed his professors. On his 17th birthday, Sarah finally made the decision she'd been postponing for years. She called Daniel into the living room, an old box in her hands, and told him the complete truth. She spoke of Michael, of the love they shared, of the fake photograph, of the crime, of everything. "Your father is in prison," she said with tears rolling down her cheeks. "He's been there since before you were born. He doesn't know you exist. I kept the truth from him because I thought it was best, but now I see I made a mistake. You had the right to know your father, and he had the right to know you." Daniel felt the ground move beneath his feet. His father was a criminal, a man who had killed another out of jealousy. His entire life had been built on lies and secrets. The initial anger gave way to something more complex, a desperate need to understand. "I want to meet him," he finally said. "I need to look him in the eyes and decide for myself what kind of man he is." Sarah nodded, knowing she couldn't ask for more. She gave him the prison address, the letters she'd written but never sent, and an old photograph of Michael smiling under the field sun, when the world was still a place full of possibilities. 2 months later, Daniel Hayes presented himself at the state penitentiary as an investigating attorney for judicial review cases. He'd prepared a professional story, a legal pretext, but his heart beat with the force of a war drum. He was about to meet the man whose blood ran through his veins, the man his mother had loved so intensely she'd sacrificed everything for that love. The warden led him to the visiting room. When Michael Hayes entered, Daniel felt time stop. There he was. His father. A 44-year-old man who looked 60, with completely gray hair, hunched back, trembling hands of someone who'd carried an invisible weight for too long. Michael sat down slowly, looking at the young lawyer with curiosity mixed with weariness. "Good morning, young man. They told me you want to talk about my case." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to maintain professional composure while his inner world crumbled. "Yes, Mr. Hayes. My name is Daniel. Daniel Bennett. I investigate cases where circumstances weren't fully considered in the original trial." Hearing the last name, Michael visibly paled. His hands on the table began trembling more intensely. "Bennett, are you related to Sarah?" I'm her son, Daniel answered, deciding to be direct. I'm 17 years old. I was born 8 months after your incarceration. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael leaned back as if he'd received a physical blow, his eyes opening with disbelief and pain. Did she have a child? Mine. Yes, sir. I'm your son. The words floated in the air between them like a confession, like a sentence, like a miracle. Michael covered his face with his hands, and the sobs he'd repressed for 18 years finally surfaced. He cried for the lost time, for the first steps he never saw, for the word daddy he never heard. I don't deserve this, he moaned. I don't deserve to have a son. I'm a murderer. I destroyed my life, destroyed your mother's life. I don't deserve. This isn't about deserving, Daniel interrupted, his own voice breaking. It's about what is. I exist. I spent 17 years wondering who my father was, feeling like something was missing. My mother told me everything. The love you shared, the fake photograph, how someone manipulated you both. I came to meet you to decide for myself what kind of man you are. Michael looked up, his eyes red and swollen. Ask me anything. I have nothing to hide. Not anymore. For the next 2 hours, father and son talked. Michael spoke about his days in prison, about how he'd tried to take his own life twice because the guilt was unbearable, about how a prison chaplain named Father Thomas saved him by teaching him that living with regret was his true punishment and his only chance at redemption. He talked about the nights when he carved wooden figures, each one representing another day that passed without being able to undo his mistake. He told him about the other prisoners he counseled, trying to keep them from making the same mistakes he'd made. Do you truly regret it? Daniel finally asked, the question he'd come to ask. Michael looked him directly in the eyes. Every second of every day. Not a moment passes when I wouldn't trade my life to bring that man back. I killed someone innocent, son. Someone who probably didn't even know about the fake photograph. And because of my weakness, my inability to control my rage, he's dead and I'm alive. That's my cross, and I'll carry it until my last breath. Daniel studied his father's face, searching for signs of deception. But all he saw was genuine pain, deep regret, and a desperate desire to be better. I believe you, he finally said. And I'm going to help you. Help me. Huh. I'm a lawyer, father. When you get out in a year, you won't be alone. You'll have a place to go, work waiting for you, and a family to welcome you. If you want it, of course. For the first time in 18 years, Michael felt something he'd completely forgotten. Hope. From that day on, Daniel visited Michael every Sunday without fail. The conversations evolved from initial caution to a deep connection that transcended blood. Michael told him about his mistakes, about the lessons he'd learned in solitude, about how pain could transform or destroy a person depending on how one chose to face it. Daniel shared stories about his mother, about how she'd worked tirelessly to raise him alone, about how she never allowed another man to get close because her heart belonged only to Michael. He told him about his law studies, about the cases he worked on defending people society had discarded. My mother never stopped loving you, Daniel told him on his 5th visit. She never married, never moved on. She raised me alone, defying her entire family, because she couldn't love anyone else. Michael felt his heart break and rebuild at the same time. She shouldn't have waited for me. She should have remade her life. But she did. And that's what makes her love extraordinary. It wasn't a love that faded with time. It was a love that survived the worst of tragedies. On his 8th visit, Daniel brought a gift, a pocket watch with a tiny photograph inside. It was Michael and Sarah at the Harvest Festival where they met, captured in a perfect moment of pure happiness. My mother kept this for 18 years, Daniel explained. She says she wants you to have it, to remember there was a time when the world was beautiful. Michael held the watch reverently, looking at the photograph through tears he couldn't contain. There they were, young and full of hope, unaware of the storm that was coming. The other prisoners noticed the change in Michael. The silent, melancholy man now smiled occasionally, walked with his back straighter. There was light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. When they asked what had changed, Michael simply said, I discovered I have a son, and that's given me a reason to keep going. Daniel knew there was a conversation his father needed to have before leaving prison. A conversation with Anthony Mendez's family, the man Michael had killed. For months, Daniel investigated, located Anthony's mother, and finally gathered the courage to contact her. Mrs. Isabel Mendez had aged prematurely after her son's death. She lived alone in a modest house, surrounded by photographs of Anthony, trapped in a grief that never ended. When Daniel explained who he was and why he wanted to talk to her, the woman remained silent for long minutes. "Why should I speak with the son of the man who killed my Anthony?" she finally asked, her voice breaking. "Because my father needs to ask for your forgiveness in person. Because he spent 18 years regretting every day. Because his physical freedom is near, but his emotional freedom depends on your answer." Mrs. Mendez agreed to meet with Michael at the prison. It was a moment everyone feared. When she entered the visiting room, Michael fell to his knees before her, tears flowing freely down his face. "Mrs. Mendez, there are no words to express how sorry I am. I killed your son. I took away the most precious thing you had. And there's no punishment enough, no apology enough." The woman looked at him with an indecipherable expression. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "Stand up, Mr. Hayes. I've spent 18 years hating you, wishing you'd suffer as I suffered. But the hatred only hurt me. My son won't return, no matter how much rage I keep in my heart." Michael stood up slowly, not daring to look her in the eyes. "After Anthony's death, I investigated what happened," Mrs. Mendez continued. "I discovered the fake photograph, the manipulation. My son wasn't perfect, Mr. Hayes. He was naive, allowed someone to use him in a cruel game. He didn't deserve to die for that, but he wasn't completely innocent in what happened either." She took an envelope from her purse and handed it to Michael. "I wrote this letter 5 years ago but never had the courage to send it. The summary is simple. I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because I've decided to choose peace over rage. And because I need to believe that something good can emerge even from the worst tragedy." Michael held the envelope with trembling hands, unable to speak. "You have a wonderful son, Mr. Hayes. When you get out, don't waste that blessing. Live the life my Anthony couldn't live. Be the father he never had the chance to be. That will be your redemption." Before leaving, she did something unexpected. She leaned down and kissed Michael's forehead, like a mother blessing her child. "Go in peace. And be happy, please. Because if you can find happiness after all this, then maybe there's hope for all of us." That night, Michael read Mrs. Mendez's letter. In it, she recounted her own journey from pain to forgiveness, about how she'd had to choose between being consumed by bitterness or finding a way to keep living. At the end of the letter, there was a postscript that made Michael cry with healing. "My husband died 3 years ago, and my other children live far away. If ever you and your family would like to visit me, my door is open." I believe Anthony would have appreciated knowing that his death didn't divide people forever, but eventually united them. For the first time in 18 years, Michael felt the weight of guilt lighten. It didn't disappear, but it became more bearable. He'd received something he never thought he deserved: forgiveness from the person who had the most right to hate him. The sun was barely beginning to rise when Michael Hayes woke on his last morning as a prisoner. He dressed in the suit Daniel had brought him, his hands trembling so much he had to try 3 times to button his shirt. He looked in the small mirror and barely recognized the man looking back at him. The warden waited for him with the release papers. "You're a free man, Michael." Free. The word sounded strange after 18 years. They walked toward the main door, and every step he took felt like walking toward another world, one he'd forgotten how to navigate. The door finally opened, and the sunlight hit him like a wave. Michael blinked, his eyes taking time to adjust. And then he saw her. Sarah was standing 20 yards from the entrance, exactly as he remembered her but completely different at the same time. Her black hair now had silver strands, her face showed the lines of time, but her eyes were still the same ones that had captured his heart so many years ago. She wore a simple white dress. In her hands she held a red rose. Michael stood paralyzed, unable to move. 20 years of separation, of pain, of regret hit him suddenly. But it was Sarah who took the first step. And the second. And the third. She walked toward him with determination, with grace, with a love that had withstood 2 decades of trials. When she stood before him, she extended the rose. "I believe you owe me a dance," she said simply, with a smile that was half tears, half joy. Michael took the rose with trembling hands, and the tears he'd been holding back finally spilled over. "Sarah, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to apologize for." She put a finger to his lips, silencing him. "There have been enough apologies. Enough pain. Now I just want you to hold me and tell me you still love me." "I love you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never stopped loving you. Not a single day." They embraced right there in front of the prison gates, 2 souls that had been separated by destiny but were finally reunited. From a nearby car, Daniel watched the scene with tears in his eyes. He'd waited his entire life to see his parents together. The following months were of adjustment and reconstruction. Michael began working at a construction company that Father Thomas had secured for him. The work was hard, but honest, and Michael was grateful for it. Every house he helped build felt like he was also building his new life. Daniel thrived in his career as a lawyer, defending cases of people who needed second chances. "My father is my inspiration," he'd say. "He showed me that no person is beyond redemption." Sundays became sacred for the family. It was the day when all 3 sat together, shared stories, laughed and cried together. Sometimes they invited Mrs. Mendez, who had become an adoptive grandmother, finding comfort in the family that had emerged from tragedy. Now, if this story has touched your heart, if it's made you reflect on forgiveness, redemption, and the power of unbreakable love, don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more soul-touching stories like this. Your support helps us continue sharing these life lessons we all need to hear. Now, stay with us to discover the surprising conclusion of this journey. A year after Michael's release, Daniel came home with exciting news. "Dad, Mom, I met someone. Her name is Laura. She's a teacher in the next county, and I think she's the one." Sarah hugged her son with joy. "That's wonderful. When will we meet her?" "Next Sunday. I want you to meet the woman I plan to marry." Michael felt a mix of joy and nostalgia. His son was growing up, building his own life. "It'll be an honor to meet her, son. If she makes you happy, then I already love her." 6 months later, Michael had the honor of walking alongside Daniel toward the altar. When the minister asked who gave the groom, Michael spoke with a clear and proud voice. "His mother and I, with all our blessing and love." At the reception, Michael danced with Sarah under the stars, just as they'd done so many years ago at that harvest festival. Their bodies were no longer young, but the love that united them was stronger than ever. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "More than I deserve," he replied. "I have a wife who loves me, a son who makes me proud, a home. I've been blessed 1,000 times more than I deserved." Suffering ends, Michael. Love remains. That's what we've learned. A year later, Laura announced she was pregnant. Michael was going to be a grandfather. The news filled him with an emotion so intense he had to sit down. "A grandchild," he murmured with tears in his eyes. "I'm going to meet my grandchild. And he'll know you," Daniel said. "Not as the man who made a mistake, but as the grandfather who will love him. As the example that there's always hope." When the baby was born, a beautiful boy with bright eyes, Daniel and Laura gave him a name that made Michael cry. Anthony Michael Hayes. "Anthony, in honor of the man whose death changed so many lives," Daniel explained. "So his name will be remembered not only for tragedy, but for the redemption that followed. And Michael for you, Dad. So this child carries the name of a man who learned it's never too late to change." Michael held his grandson in his arms, looking at that perfect little face, and in that moment made a silent promise. This child would grow up knowing that mistakes don't define a person, that forgiveness is possible, that love can survive even the worst storms. 5 years later, Michael was 50 years old but looked younger than when he'd left prison. His family's love had rejuvenated him. His grandson Anthony, now 4 years old, adored him and spent afternoons learning to carve wood with his grandfather. "Grandpa," Anthony asked one day, "why do people sometimes look at you funny in town?" Michael set aside the piece of wood and looked at his grandson seriously. "Because I made a very big mistake a long time ago, little one. A mistake that hurt many people. And although I've tried to be better, some people can't forget. Does that make you sad?" "Sometimes. But then I come home, see your dad, your mom, your grandma, and I remember I've been blessed with a second chance. And that's more important than what others think." The boy thought for a moment. "I think you're the best grandpa in the world." Michael hugged his grandson, feeling his heart fill with gratitude. One afternoon, while the whole family was gathered, an elderly man approached the house walking with difficulty. It was Lawrence Gardner, the man who had delivered the fake photograph so many years ago. Now he was a sick old man who came to ask forgiveness before dying. "Michael Hayes, I was the one who gave you that fake photograph," he confessed between sobs. "I did it out of envy, out of resentment. I've lived 23 years with that guilt." Michael knelt beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. "I spent many years hating you, Lawrence. But I learned that hatred only poisoned me. I chose to wield that knife. You played your part, but I made the decision. We can both choose how to end our stories. I chose to be better. Now you have the same option. You don't hate me? I'm too tired to hate. And I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you give because others deserve it, but something you give because you need it. So yes, I forgive you." Daniel helped the old man to his feet. "Mr. Gardner, if you need help, you only have to ask." When Lawrence left, Sarah embraced Michael. "I'm proud of the man you've become." "I still have bad days," he admitted. "Days when guilt crushes me. But then I look at my family and find reasons to keep going." Mrs. Mendez, who had arrived for Sunday dinner, joined them. "Grace isn't about deserving, Michael. It's about receiving. And you've learned to receive. That's your greatest victory." Little Anthony ran to his grandfather and took his hand. "Grandpa, are you sad?" Michael lifted his grandson and hugged him tightly. "No, little one. I'm not sad. I'm grateful. For you, for your dad, for all of you. You are my redemption." Michael Hayes' story teaches us that even when we make the most terrible mistakes, there's always an opportunity for redemption if we're willing to face the consequences and work every day to be better. Sarah's love shows us that true strength lies in the capacity to forgive and believe in the transforming power of compassion. Mrs. Mendez's forgiveness reminds us that letting go of bitterness doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing to live without the weight of resentment. And Daniel's life teaches us that we can take our parents' lessons and build something brighter. Because we're all, in some way, waiting for our own second chance. And that day can be today if we decide it.